Hey, Renter Retires, it's Adam Schrader here with another episode and joined as usual by founder and CEO of Renter Retirement, Zach Leemaster. And today it's just the two of us, no guests. We just want to get together and we wanted to talk about the importance of location whenever you're investing in real estate, because we ran across some news articles, sent them to Zach, and I said, hey, we got to talk about this, man. It's location whenever you're talking about real estate. And cash flow can happen in many different markets, but sometimes you don't want to be in markets, even though they cash flow. So, well, first off, good to see you, Zach.
Yeah, likewise, Adam. We just came back after the 4th of July weekend or holiday. So, I mean, you do anything fun with the family?
No, we usually do fireworks, but we actually didn't end up doing them this year. We just had, I had big plans to go out and buy them, but we just had a bunch of other stuff going on around the house. We had a lot of work done, and we moved a whole bunch of stuff out of rooms, and now we're having to move them back in. And so that was pretty much our whole day.
Oh, well, that's a letdown, Adam. You're usually, I thought you're the orchestrator and the conductor of the big firework show that usually goes on in your neighborhood, right? Is this not your role? Have you been replaced, or what's happening here?
No, well, a couple of things. Number one, Travis County, I did not do that ever in my life. I've never, ever done that. But no, our neighbor who usually goes in with me and does it was out of town. We had this other stuff going on, and so it just kind of went by the wayside. We watched the Capitol 4th, the DC extravaganza on PBS.
Okay. Well, at least you got something in to celebrate. We just barbecued and hung out with family, and that's about it. So nice relaxing holiday, but back in the swing of things. And I think this will be a good topic to talk about, because this is something that, as far as like choosing, really this is about like how to choose the right market to invest in, because this is something that is very challenging. A lot of people invest, or they feel most comfortable to start investing locally in their local market, which is absolutely fine. But I think, as you grow and become a more successful investor, you certainly should be aware of how to analyze different markets, certain things to think about, and something you should consider investing out of market, because more than likely there's another market out there that is either more conducive to your goals and offers a better return on investment than to say just your own backyard. The challenge is, how do you identify that market? How do you have the team established in that area and position yourself to be successful? And I would like to mention that this one thing has allowed my wife and I to be dramatically more successful. Like, if I had to attribute our success in investing to one thing, it was simply stepping outside of our comfort zone and looking at different markets, not just being hyper focused on our own local market, because that allowed us to really become more savvy investors and expedite our success, where we could be focused on building a long-term portfolio that offered the best returns, not just investing locally where we felt comfortable. And that was paramount in growing our portfolio. But there's a lot of things you need to consider, right? And even if you do invest locally, is that really an area that's going to position you to be successful long-term with tax structures and legislation? So yeah, a super important topic to talk about.
Yeah. And so, people often ask us, because, one of the things we talk about in our intro calls with people is the importance of and how we choose markets. And one of those is landlord-friendly. And they ask, on a not infrequent basis, the question is asked of, what does landlord-friendly mean? And there are obvious states that jump out as being completely landlord-unfriendly and very, very tenant-skewed. And one of those that people hear about all the time is where a lot of investors come from, and that's California. It's just not skewed towards investors at all. It's very much in terms of the tenants. And I found an article that was from the CBS 8. I believe it's in San Diego. And it was a San Diego woman has squatters who's been living in her rental home that she has for over 9 months without paying rent. And she filed an eviction with them, and the judge has ruled against her twice. And she's an 81-year-old woman. So it's not some big, scary, hedge fund with 100,000 properties. It's an 81-year-old woman. Says she has 6 people living in her rental house, which she's owned for decades. None of them have written leases. And they took over her property after her previous tenant died. And the judge essentially said that they have verbal rental agreements with her, because at one time she accepted a rental payment from them. She accepted one rental payment from them. They stopped paying after that. And the judge just came out and said, well, then you've got a lease. It's incredible.
Yeah, put that link in there to that article too, in the show notes, or put it up on there so people can look at this and read for themselves. But I think this example really just is one case study of like the challenging things or the risks of being a landlord in maybe the wrong area. And we're not here to, crap on any specific markets, right? You can be successful in any market with the right strategy and plan, but certainly from a business perspective, there are areas that would set you up to be a more successful landlord, that have better tax structures, legislation. When we look at an area that we want to invest in and we want to, we don't want to make it challenging, right? Like, I don't want to have to go through the court system for a year to try to evict someone where they're probably racking up utilities. They may or may not be, taking care of the house, probably damaging the house, certainly not paying rent. So, that's a long time where that can set you back on your returns a lot, right? Decades potentially. And so when we look
at California, if you haven't gotten paid, and if you have a San Diego house you haven't paid in 9 months, you're easily probably at least 20 grand negative in those 9 months. And this is a woman who's owned the house for decades. She's probably still out 15, 20 grand. That they're, number one, probably not taking care of the house. Number two, if something goes wrong, probably not reporting it to her to get somebody in. So it's
really unfortunate. And obviously we feel it for her. And this is just a reminder to us all, like, do things right. Maybe don't self-manage. I understand, like, that's probably one of the biggest issues, because if you're self-managing, and I know that a lot of people want to start there so they have the experience, or, they needed to make the numbers work in some of these more expensive areas. But are you really reading all the legislation on all the laws required around being a landlord, and really understanding what your rights are and your position? Probably not. But that's just one of many reasons to have a right property manager. But when we're evaluating a market, when we look at landlord-friendly legislation, like, what does that actually mean? And a lot of what we're evaluating is areas where, we're just using the eviction history and the leasing in this scenario, but we want to be able to evict a tenant quickly if we need to, right? But we also need to be able to write a lease and have protections from a landlord perspective that are going to allow us to actually run a business in real estate and not have the tenant be more protected than the landlord. But other things to think about is things like rent control. There are some states where you have statewide rent control now. And so these are usually sometimes coastal areas where same thing. You literally are capped on the income that you can charge. But also, as far as landlord-friendly legislation, we want to look at things like, okay, as part of the lease, what are protections? What are things that you can require tenants to do or not to do? Can you charge them for utilities if they're not taking care of the house? Like, can you pass certain expenses on to them from the city if they're required to do snow removal or the lawn care, and they don't do that? Like, can you build them in a lot of these tenant-friendly areas that you cannot? And so it's all sorts of these things that you need to consider and understand. And unfortunately, really, a lot of people don't know about them until they find themselves in a position like this, right?
Yeah, it's brutal to see this, and this woman's husband is even a lawyer. And they can't get through it. And another thing that you have to look at and what you want to check is, maybe it's somewhat landlord friendly, but how long is it going to take you to get into court? There's some places where, you might be able to evict them quickly, but getting them into court is going to take 4 or 5 months. There's other places where, you can get into court within, 2 weeks and have somebody out 30 to 60 days and, you're ready to go. So it's a very in-depth look. You can't just say, it's next door so I can get rid of the tenants. Well, even if they're next door, you can't necessarily get rid of the tenants. You can make their life not fun, but legally, what are your options? And so you really have to look at that. And there's some places, and this was one of the things that, this article about San Diego was the one that really got me thinking about it. But then I saw an article about Florida, because, we invest in Florida. Florida is very easy to evict tenants. It's kind of a interesting state where it's one of the fastest to evict, and it is the longest foreclosure time. So they're very protective of homeowners and not so much of tenants. So it's very good for investors, but there are areas in it that aren't. Like DeSantis signed a bill rolling back some of the areas that had signed like tenant bill of rights. And there were a couple of cities, I think Miami might have been one of them, and there were a couple other cities that had created a tenant bill of rights. And the state came in and passed the legislation saying, hey, no, you can't do this. DeSantis signed it. So it's something that if you thought about, you might have thought, hey, Florida's landlord friendly. I can go anywhere. Well, you need to look at individual places too, because they can pass their own legislation. Now, obviously, this has since rolled it back. But if you'd been investing there 1-2 years ago in some of these cities, you may not have been in as good a position as you thought you should have been.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to take a step back and just say, it's important to understand where you're investing. But Adam, let's talk about how would someone identify an area that has landlord-friendly legislation? Like, how do they determine that? How do they, obviously, if they're investing through our network, we've done the research for them and have decided on certain areas because of things like this. This is part of our criteria that we look for in areas that we personally invest. But if someone's just doing it on their own or starting from scratch, let's talk about how to determine a right location to invest in and come up with some of these metrics. And then also, what are other important things people should be considering when choosing a market outside of just the landlord-friendly legislation? But first of all, like, what advice would you give to someone that's trying to determine, like, okay, what is landlord-friendly? So what's landlord-friendly state and what's not?
Yeah. So, I mean, Google searches are obviously helpful. There's there's a website I've looked at whenever I was considering whenever I did self-manage for a little bit. It's called nolo.com, NOLO.com. You can find a lot of stuff there legally, either getting forms, or I think you can even book a call with a lawyer to talk about some things. Calling property managers and talking to them is a really good one. I mean, a lot of people who follow us go on Bigger Pockets, and that's one place to go. But take that with a grain of salt, because obviously the people there aren't likely to be up to date on the laws, but they can give you a general idea of where is going to be good. But I would say property managers are a great place to start. Just general, if you Google search top 10 states landlord friendly, you'll get a pretty good idea. I mean, obviously everybody's list will be a little bit different, but if your states that you're looking at is anywhere in there on most of the lists, it's probably going to be a solid place to start. You can also call on housing authorities if you want to get very granular. You can call and ask about tenant. I would suggest going in asking as a tenant from that perspective, because they might not be as kind to landlords if you ask. So calling housing authorities and asking about that would be another good place to start.
If you can actually talk to someone and you're not on the phone for 3 hours dealing with the government phone line. So no, that's great information. I think in general, if you just were looking at a U.S. map, like a lot of the areas that we focus on is Midwest and Southeast. If you get to coastal areas, I mean, politics aside, if you're usually in a more liberal state, then you're going to have more tenant favorable laws. If you're in more of a conservative state, then not always, but generally speaking, it's going to be more favorable of landlords. So, I mean, that's just like high level starting points. A lot of the coastal areas, Southeast, outside of that, I mean, you're usually more tenant friendly and have more control. And so those are areas that become more challenging and are usually taxed higher as well. So, but Adam, what else is important in terms of choosing a right market to you if you're just kind of deciding, okay, maybe I have 1 or 2 rentals and I want to start investing out of state and start doing my research and find an area that is going to allow me to be successful?
I mean, we've talked about before, I mean, you need to look at the population trends as well. But if you're coming in and just looking at, general numbers, I mean, you've got so much free data out there that you can get on. I mean,
almost too much, right? It's distracting, the shiny object syndrome.
I tend to limit mine to, I try to go with just real numbers. So I tend to dive into the census website quite a bit whenever I'm looking at areas, because they're the ones that are going to be, I mean, you can hop on like Wikipedia or something, or, Google how many people are here, what's the percent change, but those, I don't know where they're pulling their numbers. So I prefer, I mean, love or hate government. They have a lot of data that's that has already been paid for and it's already been accumulated. So I always start there. I mean, you can see if you go on to census.gov and start looking into areas, it gives you a pretty significant breakdown. I mean, they'll break it down by age, by home ownership. They'll break it down by gender. They'll break it down by education a lot. I mean, they'll give you poverty rates. I mean, they'll give you so much information there that it's a really good place to start looking as to whether or not the area you're thinking about is even, worth it. Because I mean, if you're looking at an area that, shrunk 15% and now your median income is $20,000, well, who's going to be able to pay a $2,000 rent? Probably not many people in the area. Is it going to be that? So it doesn't matter if it's landlord friendly or not. If you're evicting every other tenant, well, at least you get to evict them, but you're probably not going to be in a good position. So it's always good. That's where I always start with my research.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we try to start at more of a large funnel, like macroeconomic kind of evaluation, and move to a more specific microeconomic scale. So I mean, we could evaluate like a state as a whole, but obviously within a state, Florida is a perfect example. There is a lot of different submarkets in those, and they vary dramatically in terms of price points, rents. There's general different variations in growth and in legislation. So, I mean, you got to start macro and then work your way to more specific. But what you talked about is probably the most important thing ultimately, and it's comes as no surprise. It's basic knowledge that you want to be in an area where you have a growing population, right? You want to have, you are able to grow and accumulate wealth through real estate investing over time, being in an area that you can keep a house rented, that rents will likely go up year after year, and in an area that will appreciate. Like, that's the recipe to success. And it's not terribly hard to find multiple areas that are doing that. Florida had a 2% population growth last year, which is is higher than any other state in the U.S. I think Florida just beat out Texas is the first time for this in 2022.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something for people to keep in mind as they're looking at population trends. You don't have to be growing that much to be beating the U.S. average. I think the U.S. average year over year in 2022 or 2021 was only like, it was less, it was like point something percent. Like, it was very, very minor when it comes to it. It might have only been like 0.1 or 0.2. I mean, it doesn't take much movement into an area to be beating the national average in today's day and age, because we've had lowering fertility rates, got people waiting longer. Our immigration has been cut down some. So the U.S. just isn't growing like it used to be population wise. So if you see an area that's growing, even 5-6% over a decade right now, you're in good shape, relatively speaking.
That's a really good point that you just mentioned that I forgot to previously. When you're looking at data, so many people just look back over the past year or 2 years, right? Look over a period of time. Yes, the past year to two is important to kind of see what that trend is, but also so is the past 5 to 10 years. If you see a graph that goes like this with growth, most graphs are like this, where it's like, you have this, subtle change and fluctuation, some ebbs and flows. But if you do it on a linear graph, it is, growing. And that is important to see on a trend. That's much different than a graph that looks like this, that flatlines, or like this, right? But you got to evaluate over a period of time. And likely, if there's been somewhat of an upward trend over the past 5 to 10 years, that's likely to continue unless something really changes dramatically or economically within that local area. So I think that's important to look at over a period of time. That's just one data point. And I think that's fairly obvious, is being an area that has growing population, and then coupling that with house pricing that is affordable compared to rents. A lot of things that we've been looking at is what we consider secondary markets, where there's still population growth outside of, but still commutable to a large metropolitan area, where, the housing is maybe a fraction of the cost, but rents are surprisingly still relatively high. So you can get a cash on cash return that's great and still be accessible to a metropolitan area that's continually expanding. So that's just one example of areas that we've been focusing on. But in general, what else would you say, Adam, is important beyond population growth and landlord-friendly legislation? We talked about tax a little bit. What are some other important things are key to set yourself up for success when identifying the right market?
Well, I mean, you need to know your numbers. I mean, that's quite honestly, anytime you're investing in real estate is knowing your numbers. I mean, you need to know the tax rate so you can get a legitimate number that you can put in there. You need to be talking with people on the ground to know where in there to actually invest. I mean, I think what you were saying just made me think about, being in the secondary markets. Secondary markets quickly become primary markets in a lot of cases. Tertiary quickly becomes secondary. I mean, I think if everybody just kind of takes a second and thinks about where they live and think about when you were there 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, what was considered the boonies, is probably now just considered right next door. Like where I live in Austin right now, when I lived here back in high school, I thought where I lived was way out in the middle of nowhere because there wasn't the road that connects us to the rest of Austin hadn't been fully opened yet. And as soon as that opened, boom, the whole place grew up. But I mean, at the time I thought, man, that's way out there. Who would ever live out there? Well, cut 20 years later and it's, massively grown. The prices are, increasing. So, I mean, just think about the general area that you live in and kind of extrapolate that onto others and not worry about saying, hey, this area, yeah, it's close to here, but there's not a whole lot going on there right now. It's, well, okay, how's the primary market? How are the other markets doing that are going to lead there? So don't just take what's my return right now? And because this is the problem that I see people fall into a lot is they look at their numbers year one, and that's the number that they use forever. They're like, oh man, I'm going to get this property. It's going to have $300 a month cash flow, but I'm going to need like 40 of those to get to, 12 grand a month like I want. It's like, are you never going to raise rent?
That's because that's what a pro forma shows. That's the numbers they're seeing on paper. But they can't conceptualize, what year 3, 4, or 5 looks like with even very conservative appreciation, debt reduction, moderate rental increases year after year, your tax benefits and depreciation, like how that all compounds, right? And all those things.
Somebody built a calculator.
So, that's a good reference point. Let's throw that in there. The link to our wealth tracker. This is just a free tool we've developed. It's still in its beta stage. So, like, not everything may be functioning 100%, but we wanted to at least get it out just for our community to use it at no cost. Where the purpose of this is, yes, to evaluate properties that you're looking at potentially buying. So it has a pro forma basic analysis. You can also you set up a profile and add your previous properties to kind of track performance. But the main purpose of this is to project into the future to say, all right, well, based on what my financial goals, with whatever variables I want to put in with anticipated appreciation, rental increase, expense increase, your amortization scale for your loan structure, whatever that loan structure is, where's my net worth and cash flow going to be based on, equity, and rental growth in 5 to 10 years, or whatever amount you choose. And I've yet to find a tool that does that, but it's really important to project. But it also allows you to conceptualize like the power of real estate and just understand, like, even a 3 or 4% appreciation compounding year after year, plus a little bit of rental increases, and like it goes a long way, is rather surprising. So I think, yes, that's a good plug for the calculator.
Yeah. So what are you looking at whenever you do it? Do you have any websites you like to go to or encyclopedias you like to open whenever you're looking into areas?
So we do a lot of analysis on, census data as well. Adam, you mentioned that as a good resource. But one thing at one point I want to make clear is that it's important not to overcomplicate things either, right? Like I'll say this, and this is when I would talk about what I'm about to now. This is a lot of what we've done on personal investing. And it will probably sound very rudimentary and maybe a little risky to people, but this has served us well over time. Of just, if you're in an area that has shown a general population trend, and an area that has it's an area that's attractive, that people want to move there. That's, if you just like dumb it down a little bit and don't overcomplicate it. If there are people that are moving to an area for a certain reason, and you have general population growth, even if it's modest, that is probably, if it's an attractive area to live in the country, you're probably going to be okay investing there. right? And I think the best thing that we've done is we've invested in a lot of those areas. We've never put our eggs all in one basket, but we've chosen a lot of different markets where it's just like, hey, people are moving there. There's good weather. There's affordable cost of living. Maybe it's an area that's been business friendly, areas where people have recreation and they're likely to move. And a lot of those, going back to secondary markets, we've chosen areas that are more family oriented. A big trend that we're seeing now post COVID is that there's more people working from home. It is crazy the amount of people that don't go into the office anymore. And that was a trend that was already starting just with technology, but COVID put us light years ahead and expedited that trend. And now it's become accepted as a norm. And businesses are also understanding that, hey, people can be more efficient. They don't have to waste time commuting to the office. You don't have people walking into your cubicle or your office throughout the day distracting you. Like, you can run a business efficiently and lean from having effective people being at home, and you don't have to pay for office space. That's why we're seeing a kind of a squash in the commercial office space. But secondary market, same thing with where we live. We live about 40 minutes north of Denver. 10 years ago, all farmland. Now it's suburbs, and the houses here are equivalent to what they cost in downtown Denver. And it's just because, it's a growing area, and this is an area where people want to live. We don't own a lot of residential here, but we've been very successful in different markets, just kind of like understanding, hey, if you just buy in a generally decent area that has some growth, like, don't overcomplicate it, just buy it and forget about it, and then reevaluate in 5 or 10 years. And I think you'll do quite well. And something is people don't understand too is the Midwest. One thing I think is hard for people to conceptualize about investing out of state is, in their own mind, they have their own perception of what an area would be like. And they would say, well, why the heck, someone living in California or New York or whatever why would I move? Why would anyone move to Ohio, right? Or Kansas City, Missouri? It sounds terrible. But that's just them. And that's, I think, a limiting belief. There is a lot of population shift within a state of certain people moving to different areas. And in a large metropolitan area, for example, Cleveland, we've been extremely successful with suburbs that are within, same thing, 40 minutes or whatever to downtown Cleveland, that have their own economy, things like Akron and Barberton. Same thing with Kansas City, Missouri. Some more family-oriented suburbs that are still commutable to the city, areas like Lee Summit, Independence, Raytown. I mean, these are areas where the cost of living is much more affordable. You can buy a house for $150,000 today that likely will be worth significantly more as that metropolitan area continues to grow out and expand. So I guess I just went on a rant here, Adam. But the main thing I want to point is don't overcomplicate it. If there's an area like it makes sense, then buy it and continue buying those areas, and I think you'll do fine.
Yeah, it's kind of, it made me think of people always talk about the paralysis of analysis, and it's like whenever you're shopping for things nowadays, like, you can go on Amazon or Google and just search for, like right now I'm looking for an entertainment center for our new room. I can go online and I can look and say, oh, the reviews on this, the reviews on that, this one might be a little bit better in the price of this. But eventually, you think, I'm just going to go to the store and buy one that's there that looks good, because I know they're not going to have junk in the store, and I'm going to walk out with it. It's kind of like that with the markets. Eventually you can look and say, let's use Florida, for example. Oh, Lehigh versus this other one versus this other one versus this other one. Where's the best return going to be in 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Well, we don't really know, exactly which one. Like, if you bought a $300,000 house in 3 different markets there, which one is going to have the absolute best cash flow in 5 years and the highest appreciation? I don't know. But I can almost guarantee you, based on the numbers that we're seeing, both in terms of the properties and the areas and this, that, and the other, you're going to be in a lot better position than if you don't buy a house in one of those areas.
You don't need to spend years researching areas. I think that's really just an excuse to not have a serious goal and take action. In 30 minutes with where we're at with technology today, there's so much data available. There's too much to analyze stuff. You don't need to. I mean, think about people investing out of state 30, 40 years ago. I mean, flying out to areas, and the real estate was different at that point in time. You had no idea what the houses even looked like, right? How do you understand a different market? And people were quite successful then, But now we have so much data available. You should be able to spend with an intentional dedicated 30 minutes online. You should be able to come to a determination of a handful of different areas that you want to invest. And from there, it really is just a decision of like, okay, actually doing it, because you fully understand a market when you invest in that area. And so I want to kind of end here with a concept or my opinion on researching to a certain extent, but not getting to the point where you're getting analysis paralysis. I think it's important to understand and have a baseline criteria and fundamental idea of where to invest. But ultimately, you gotta take a little bit of risk, right? And that's stepping outside of your comfort zone and investing in an area that looks good. It checks off multiple boxes, and then doing that again and rinsing and repeating in a different area and continue. That's why we talk about diversification and scalability. I love that you just talked about, the projection of 3 different properties in 3 different areas, because you don't know. That's the reality. But as you invest in an area, that's where you really become more aware and confident about a market, is actually going through the process of investing there as you learn it. And then you can say, hey, I want to continue to scale, or maybe I want to invest in this area, this little submarket of this location, as you learn more about it. But you only learn by taking action and, just letting real estate do what it does over time.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, and that's one of the things we always tell people, 3 to 5 properties in 3 to 5 markets, because that's, you can hit single after single after single, and eventually something's going to become a double, triple, or home run. You just keep putting the bat on ball, as they say, and you just keep acquiring the properties, as they're all going to most likely do very well for you, pretty well. And then you're going to have one that you just look at in 3, 4, 5 years and you go, holy crap. that one did a lot. I'm going to refi and pull a lot of capital out of that, or sell and do a exchange into like 3 or 4 different properties because of the appreciation that you saw in just that one. And so, but you're never going to see that if you don't have it in your portfolio in the first place.
It only takes 1 or 2 of those to make a dramatic difference, for your net worth and your lifestyle and your legacy.
Yep, absolutely. So if you're interested in finding some of those properties, you can head over to renttoretirement.com and check out what we have there. You can find all of our inventory there. That's at renttoretirement.com. Don't forget, if you want Zach's copy of top 20 markets to invest in 2023, you've still got time this year to get some in that time frame. Email to podcast@renttoretirement.com. We'll get that sent over as soon as we can. That's podcast@renttoretirement.com. Really appreciate the time you spent educating yourself today. Don't forget to leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you utilize. We greatly appreciate it, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for watching the Rent to Retirement YouTube channel. Check out some of our other videos, like this one, or this one here.